Welcome to our October webinar as part of our Resilience by Design learning series. Today we'll be talking about the resilience of your security systems, specifically looking at the facility management side of the organization. I am Linda Nelson. I'm the founder and president of I-Corps, and I will be your speaker today. Just a reminder, this is part of our 2025 Resilience by Design learning series. If you'd like to earn your Resilience by Design learning badge, you need to attend all 10 sessions. You can do this either by the webinars are on our website, and they're also on our YouTube channel. And you just send us an email saying that you've completed it. This year, we've been focusing on the operations side of resilience. So in the February webinar, we looked at the context of the resilience strategy being on operations. Then we looked at operating as an agile organization and how to build agility and flexibility into your systems. In March, we looked at taking a systems approach to managing risk. And actually, that was April, I guess. In May, we looked at the global impact of the DORA regulations. And then in June, we moved to talking about how to increase the resilience of your crisis management and communications capability. In July, we looked at the resilience of your business continuity management system. In August, we looked at our technology and data center systems. And last month, we looked at increasing the resilience of your supply and value chains. Today, we're going to be talking about the resilience of our security systems, and we'll finish out the year in November with considering the impact of geopolitical risk on our operations. We're going to start by just looking at facility risk in general and how to strengthen your facility infrastructure security. Then we're going to look at making sure that you're integrating your technology and implementing smart technology systems. Looking at how to make sure that you are maintaining your systems, because preventive maintenance increases the life of your operations, your technology, as well as your equipment. And of course, we can't forget about making sure your people know what to do and that all of your strategies are documented into plans. We will have the recording of the webinar on the I-Corps webinar page probably on Monday, but it'll be posted on YouTube this week. Use the questions button. I should have time today to answer your questions, as long as you don't make them too hard. I'm making a joke there, but yeah, we should have time today. And you will receive a certificate of attendance, but you need to attend at least 35 minutes. So when we look at the I-Corps, or the Organizational Resilience Competency Model, in other words, what do you need to know to lead the resilience strategy? One of the competency categories or areas is preparedness and managing risk. And as part of that, those people who work on the facility side of things build more resilient facilities by integrating people, place, process, and technology within the built environment. And you'll see that definition repeated. In our capability assessment for the organization, we do have resilient facilities criteria. In this case, instead of under preparedness and managing risk, we do have it under infrastructure. And some of the criteria that we have for a more resilient facility is that you make sure that your facility is safe, that you're reducing the risk of illness or injury or exposure to hazardous materials, and that you've got a formal workplace safety program in place and everybody who works in the facility understands it. The second criteria or capability is that you have systems, the facility itself and its systems are properly maintained and operated, that the facility is physically secure. That is actually something that we're going to be focusing on today, is that access, but reducing the risk of improper access and making sure that you have a formal physical security program in place and that it's, of course, understood by those working in the facility. That the facility practices environmental stewardship as well as sustainability, and that the facility itself, no matter what kind of facility it is, has the capacity to continue to function and operate under extreme conditions such as natural disasters, extreme temperatures, sea level rise, and all the ultimate more. I always like to start with a definition just so that we're all on the same page for what it is that we're talking about. And IFMA, the International Facility Management Association, I think is the A, they're in charge of professional development and standards for facility management. And they define it as a profession that encompasses multiple disciplines to ensure, and here's where you'll see some of this repetitiveness, the functionality, the comfort, the safety, and efficiency of the built environment by integrating people, place, process, and technology. ISO, in its definition, under ISO 41001, which is a facility management standard, says almost the exact same thing, just changes it up a bit. And they talk about as a function versus a discipline or a profession that integrates people, place, and process within the built environment with the purpose of improving the quality of life of the people and the productivity of the core business. But I want to kind of set the tone for today's webinar that while we're going to talk a lot about the buildings and all of the things in the buildings, it's about enabling the organization to function efficiently, safely, and sustainably. So that's where we're going to talk about strengthening the organization so that you can adapt to future needs. And it's supposed to help help bridge that gap between people, place, process, and technology. There are several goals of facility management and for facility managers. The first one is that you have operational efficiency and continuity. And this is where you'll see the word continuity starting because really business continuity got its start in the life safety piece of this. So, but we need to make sure that the buildings, the offices, and the physical assets operate smoothly and support the daily activities because you want to have continuity of your operations. You also want to protect your people, your property information from harm or disruption. These are the two goals that we're going to look at today specifically. There certainly isn't time in the short time that we have today to talk about all of the goals, but I do want you to see that the sustainability and environmental responsibility is a key goal to reduce the environmental impact while improving cost efficiency. This is especially important for facilities such as data centers and other types of facilities that have a huge environmental, everybody has an environmental impact, but there are some sorts of buildings that have a more of an environmental impact than others. Certainly, power infrastructure in that as well. The other goal is to control the costs and optimize your assets. So maximize the value and lifespan of the facilities and the equipment. So we are going to be talking about equipment quite a bit today, but that isn't going to be the purpose of what we're talking about because equipment is part of what we're doing in a facility. We do need to talk about it. The facility itself needs to enhance occupant experience and productivity. So you create a safe and comfortable and functional environment that supports people's work and well-being. That there's strategic alignment with the organizational goals. So making the facilities a strategic asset rather than a cost center. And I do think that since the pandemic, with so many offices being less used than they were before, that this is more of a challenge to meet this goal today, maybe than it was in 2019. And of course, the facility itself needs to meet all legal, regulatory, and contractual obligations while supporting the stakeholders. And depending on what your facility does, you're going to have more or less compliance and governance as part of that. So I included this cartoon picture in here to say this is not how we're supposed to run facilities anymore. This is kind of the old school method where you got somebody in a helmet and a blue shirt, blue collar worker, as you might stereotype that in the United States, sitting around pulling out, trying to figure out what to do with this kind of the single piece of equipment. But But facility managers are supposed to ensure operational efficiency and continuity, and they need to run smoothly. So one of the jobs of facility management is to maintain the building systems, your HVAC, your plumbing, your electrical, to minimize downtime. If you can't sit in that building and do your work comfortably, then you won't be there. And so the downtime of the facility is an important aspect, and this is something that is oftentimes part of the overall business continuity management system. You also want to enhance productivity. So you don't just want to avoid or minimize downtime, you're also trying to do a better job at what you're doing. So how can we create a built environment or a facility that can help with workflow? And we want people to focus on work, not logistics. So you don't want the people working there to be distracted by the actual environment of the facility itself. So let's move to what should the facility look like. So I'm sure you've heard of building management systems. And this is just a picture of a lot of those building management systems laid out to give you an idea. But this is where your technology comes in, because a building management system is a computer-based control system, and it puts in controls and it monitors all the mechanical and equipment, such as ventilation, lighting, power, fire, and security. It's also often tied to your access control and your fire alarms and things. So you can see everything from the top with the HVAC services all the way down to the bottom right where you've got on-site technical services like your actual security guards, your energy information management, your water management, looking at your lighting and controls. All of those things are part of a building management system. And there's many, many, many of those that are for sale in the marketplace. But I would challenge you that even many of you have a simplified version of this in your homes. If you can remotely turn on your heat and your air conditioning or turn them off, or lock and unlock doors, or look through your camera to see who is at the door. You can even answer your if you still happen to be having a home phone connected to the wall, being able to check your voicemail from that remotely as well. These are things that have been in place for years, and so have building management systems for facilities. But we need to make sure that we're dealing with safety and security as well, and to protect not just the people, but also the property and the information from harm or disruption. And so we have to look at this from the perspective of all the different stakeholders, from the employees, the clients, your customers, your consumers, and any third-party vendors or contractors. We also need to look at this from the physical aspects of your internal and external environmental conditions. What kind of equipment is used? How do you store it? And what kind of storage do you have? And how do you maintain it? And making sure that understanding how people access your facility and its various parts, as well as, like we mentioned, laws or regulations that you must adhere to. So when we look at security systems, we can generally look at them kind of from these 7, I'll call them viewpoints or lenses. These are pretty commonly established. And what you're going to see as we go through this webinar today is that there is going to be overlap between these security systems, because things do overlap, as well as when we talk about some of the other aspects, we're going to be looking at access controls in many different ways. But we need to strengthen the physical infrastructure, and that's where we'll start today. Then we'll looking at how to integrate technology and smart security, how you build in redundancies and fail-safes, making sure that you've got rigorous maintenance and testing routines in place, that you're monitoring, reviewing, and then adapting as you need to continuously, that you're training your people and strengthening your policies. In this case, policies would be both your strategy and your plans, and that you're collaborating with external experts. So we're going to start with access controls. This is really what most people think about, and these are measures that are designed to deny unauthorized access to facilities. I mean, it could be as simple as a lock on the front door, unauthorized access to equipment, as well as different resources, and to be able to protect the personnel and the property from damage or harm for many reasons. It also involves the use of multiple layers of interdependent systems. things like CCTV, surveillance, security guards, protective barriers. I remember like 20 years ago, all of a sudden, all the cement barriers were put in front of buildings because we had all around the world people driving, truckloads of explosives into buildings as a way to get through. And just your typical locks, your access control protocols, as well as many, many other techniques that we can't really get into in the short time we have today. So the first thing you do when you're strengthening your physical infrastructure is to harden your entry points. Whether you're reinforcing doors, your windows, making sure that they're made with tamper-resistant materials, locks, and that you've got intrusion alarms. So I don't think any of us wants to have fenced walls or razor wires around where we live, but you might have those around where you work, especially if your building is a very protected building, probably not in a downtown or urban area, but if it's out where you're more at risk. I remember years ago when I was a consultant, people were stealing copper from an electrical distribution company. It's still a big problem today, and all the different security systems they had to have in place, because this was out in the rural communities where you couldn't have security guards, and the locks didn't matter because the cable was outside of the buildings. So just making sure that wherever you can harden entry points, that's done, that you're using a layered perimeter security, so that you've got different things between fences and barriers, that you've got lighting. I often think, all of our downtowns and our buildings are lit, and people have lights, on inside the buildings as well as outside the buildings. And we think about how much energy that we use doing that. But then when you look at the risk of having everything dark, at what point does the risk of turning off the lights become less than the cost that you're spending on keeping them on? But you want to have multiple layers of protection. You want to have controlled access zones. So I'm sure there's certain places if you're working in an office that you can access, and others that you can't. If you're in a hospital, for example, there's certainly places that only a few people can go, and most places that you can't go. So just looking at those access zones, and looking at where do you place your sensitive equipment, your alarm panels, your servers, all those things, to make sure that those are in places that people can't get to. There's quite a few different physical security components, and we touched on a couple of them, most of them with the other image. This one's a little bit easier to see, but you want to have 24/7 monitoring always, especially when your business is closed, actually. That monitoring becomes even more important. The ability to remotely set an alarm or turn it off from anywhere, anytime. I think this is pretty much in place everywhere. I always think about it, if I can do it in my home, it should be happening everywhere else. Having what's called an interactive video, so real-time video of what's going on in your business, and this is where you might see some compliance and regulatory issues for privacy. All of your different access control solutions, they should all be monitored at the different entry points throughout your building. How you look at your battery backup, making sure that if you have power outage, that everything still continues to work. Looking at your lighting controls and your small appliances. One of the things that, if you have a storage locker or a place that you store things, it frustrates me sometimes that I get in there and I'm moving things, and all of a sudden all the lights go out and I can't see anything, and I have to walk all the way around the corner to get the lights back on. And within 10 minutes, the lights are back off again. But that is something that is done, just making sure that you're managing energy costs. And here you've got your video surveillance, which probably complements the interactive video, but this is like, where are you storing that video surveillance? And what is the visibility of the overall business operations tied to that video surveillance? And as far as where you keep it over time, making sure that you're getting alert notifications when there's something triggered in your area. Even and then of course intrusion detection and control, as well as fire detection and climate management, which we've talked about. Interestingly enough, years and years ago, my kids were all in the same elementary school. I had 4 kids in kindergarten through 5th grade. And at that time, I was not working, but I was doing a lot of volunteering at our local elementary school district. And one of the things that they were doing, this is going to make me sound really old, but was they were finally locking the doors. So I think that at this elementary school where we were at, I think they had 9 or 10 access points into that building. And if those of you that are younger, you're looking at me like you're crazy. You could go in and out any of the doors anytime anyone could. And the answer to that was yes. And this was before all the school shootings started, but it was something that they wanted to start thinking about. And so, they made a single entrance where you have, where you entered door 1, and then you would be, going in and getting permission and badged and all of those things. So they asked me if I would go around to each of the elementary schools and try to get access. And wouldn't you know, they wanted to see how well people were trained. And wouldn't you know that I could get in every door pretty much, especially the one but where recess would come, and especially at lunchtime where my kids went to school, because the teachers knew me. And so they had to really learn that they could not let anyone in, even if they knew them. The other 6 elementary schools, less so, but I was still able to get in just by chatting and talking and being really friendly. Like I said, especially at the entrance and exit to the playgrounds. And so, even our schools now have access controls and intrusion detection and controls in place. Thank goodness, because we have a lot more risk to our kids than we used to have. But every building has these things. So let's just look at a few things that you should consider. You have access cards or biometrics cards. Are they based on role-based permissions? Is your visitor access logged and supervised? One of the places I consulted at again years ago, the people that logged the access, it was in a book, it was paper. And when we were looking at their business continuity plan, it was never taken off site. It was never input into the computer anywhere. And so, we had our incident was that there was a fire, and the fire happened to happen and burned up all their books, and they had none of those logs, and those logs were controlled, and they had to provide those as part of their regulatory compliance. And so just a simple thing like, yeah, it's logged and supervised, but where do you store them and how are they kept? I'm certainly hoping that we're done with the paper logs, but you still see that you log in and out of a lot of buildings by signing in with your name. But are surveillance cameras covering all of your entry and exit points? Are your external doors reinforced and fitted with tamper-proof locks? Is your perimeter lighting sufficient to deter unauthorized access? Are your windows secured with locks or shatter-resistant film? Do you have intrusion alarms installed at your key entry points? And are your alarm signals transmitted to a central monitoring service? These are all pretty simple things that you should have in place. These are not the hard questions. These are what I would call the first layer questions for seeing that. And just making sure that your security staff is trained in emergency response protocols. We're going to jump next to looking at how you integrate technology for smart security. And again, now you've got access control systems, and now you're looking at, okay, these are technology controls, things with PIN codes and remote and role-based permissions to limit entry. That you have high-resolution cameras with remote monitoring and analytics that you can detect suspicious behavior before they actually get access to your building. That you've got those intrusion detection and alarm systems. Again, these are all sensor, these are all smart, these are all tied to your technology systems. And guess what? All of your systems are now network connected. And so because of that, now you have a cybersecurity issue, because now people can come in and actually not just put a risk to your building, but they can get in through your network and attack other parts of your systems that aren't tied to your facility management. And so we need to make sure that the systems that are being used for managing risk to the facility are cyber secure, and that they can't be compromised as an entry point into your other technology systems. So most buildings have what's called building information modeling technology of some kind. So this is where you create and manage digital models of your buildings to help you make data-driven decisions about how to utilize space, how you're consuming your energy, and if you're going to need to redesign anything to make that more efficient. They also are utilizing things like machine learning and artificial intelligence. Then this is part of, if you have this smart technology on your people, helping you to see how people are moving around, how they're using the space, but also looking at intelligent asset maintenance and helping you to prevent unexpected breakdowns as part of your preventive maintenance. Making sure that all of your smart building technology is being used to help control all of your heating and air conditioning and those things. We'll talk more about a specific one. And then of course, I was just alluding to that wearable technology. I'm sure you have, for most places, smart badging systems. And this even just collects data on, where are people working during the day? How is space being occupied? How can we better utilize our resources? Especially as this is becoming a much bigger thing because we've seen so much change in where and how people work. And so it's not to see if you're working, it's trying to identify where you're working so that then the people on the facilities side can figure out how to manage the heat and the electricity and all of those things. One of my daughters loves to work at one of the buildings that her company has in downtown Chicago. And she's like, oh, I've got to get there early so in the summer I can sit where it's cool. In the winter, I can sit in a different place where it's warm, because even though it's on the same floor of the same facility, the actual environmentals don't work very well in that building. And so they actually have a strategy for where to sit based on what the weather is. So it's just a couple of questions to consider about your security as it's tied to your technology systems. Are your physical security systems segregated from your general IT networks? So looking at the fact they need to be on the network, but you don't want to compromise your overall IT systems in case your physical security systems are breached. Are you using firmware and software updates regularly to your security devices so that things are up to date? Are your access control databases being regularly audited for anomalies? These are just 3 questions for basic questions about looking at the technology side of your security. Where business continuity people tend to focus a lot is on redundancies. And so we want to make sure that the facility itself continues to operate under all conditions. And so making sure you have backup power. Of course, this is something that you've looked at forever. In fact, I remember one time being asked to come into a company to do a business impact analysis this woman's boss that hired us said that we had to do a BIA in order to prove that they needed a generator. So we did the business impact analysis and we found that there was a lot of things they needed way more important than the generator because because of where they were located. They had a lot of other risks to deal with, but she ended up getting her generator regardless. But of course, we need to be able to keep our facility systems online, and when power goes out, that you're especially vulnerable. You need to make sure that your communications are redundant as well, and making sure that you've got entry points, that all of your alarms and monitoring systems can transmit signals through multiple pathways. Now, it is pretty tricky if in rural communities, a lot of times we don't have cellular service. And you only have cell service when you have internet. So that becomes a problem if you're if your backup way is we're gonna have internet and cell service. Well, you only have internet when you only have cell service when you have internet. So you also need to make sure that you've got lots of backup ways in order to make sure that your communications continue. And of course, having fail safe or fail secure mechanisms, just as a simple example, that your doors lock automatically when your systems fail, not the other way around. So a simple question, is there a backup power supply, a UPS or a generator for your security systems, specifically for that? Are there redundant communication pathways available for alarm transmissions? And do your secure doors fail safe or lock in case of a system failure? Here's where we're going to spend a little bit of time. We're going to talk about maintenance. Nobody really wants to talk about maintenance and testing, but you're talking about equipment. You have to be talking about maintenance and testing. You need to have scheduled inspections to regularly check your cameras, your sensors, your access points for wear, for tampering, or just for, sometimes things just break, they malfunction. Making sure your software that runs all of these things is up to date and that you've got patches in place when they come out. Of course, that you're doing drills and scenario testing, that you're simulating intrusions, power failures, network outages, anything to test those systems and how they perform under stress. Make sure that you are maintaining those systems and using to track the maintenance. You have a system that tracks the maintenance of all your equipment. We'll talk more about that. That your operations and maintenance manuals describe the processes and methods and tools, components and frequencies involved for all those operations and management of those physical assets. Those manuals might be, quote, paper, or they might be electronic. Doesn't really matter so much, is that they're being used and that they're up to date and that things are kept clean. Sometimes underestimated is the importance of not just keeping your grounds clean, but keeping your equipment clean. And that helps extend the life of that equipment as well. So you need to be practicing preventive maintenance, which means getting out in front of what could break before it breaks. And tied to that is predictive maintenance. So you have to have data to help you understand what you, based on the life cycle of the different pieces of equipment, when you might predict that things might break so that you're maintaining that ahead of time. So those two things become very important, because what you really don't want to be doing is reacting and responding once things are broken and not being on top of things. In fact, if you're not doing proper cleaning, if you're not doing this proper maintenance, you're going to have things break more often. So here's where we move into from kind of a response type of program or a strategy to more of a resilient strategy where you're getting out in front of things. And when companies or all businesses are experiencing financial challenges, preventive and predictive maintenance is what gets stopped first. And so when you see around the world the different economies, and also when you have lack of resources, so not just financial resources, but you're down people, you're not able to get enough people in, the first thing that gets dropped is that maintenance. And so it is really, really important that you have rigorous maintenance and testing routines. Something to help with that is what's called a computerized maintenance management system. And this is something that you see in every data center, just to help you manage all the equipment there. But it's also really, really helpful for all of the equipment that you have as part of your facility security systems, as well as any of the systems that you use to run your equipment. Sometimes they're called enterprise asset management systems, or computerized maintenance management information system, or a computer-aided facility management package. Doesn't really matter what it's called, but you need to make sure that that not only that you should have one, but that it's working the way it should. It is a database. So it's helping you to make decisions, and it's helping you to make predictions on things. So it's only as good as the data that you get. So you have to make sure that your data is protected and backed up frequently. So here we're back to how integrated facilities management has to be with your technology systems. And I kind of think back in the day when I was buying my first cars, the people that did car maintenance and helped with making sure my car ran have very different skill sets than they do today, where you're reliant on computers to run your car. And now the people that are doing maintenance work on your car have to have a lot of different skills. And so when we're looking at facility managers, and the people that work on your equipment, they have to have now a technology background in addition to just understanding how the equipment works. So some of the things that a CMMS does is it tracks your assets. So all the equipment that you have, all the systems that you have. It helps you manage the time of when things need to be done, and that's tied very closely into scheduling of that maintenance. You don't want to shut down systems while people are in the building and people are using things that they need, but you can't do everything, especially if you're a 24, 7 by 24 by 365 organization. Is when do you get that scheduled? Not always easy to do, and maintenance gets deferred all the time, which then leads to things breaking. These systems provide you with regular reports, help you with inventory control, as well as understanding what spare parts you need. Because if you're looking at that life cycle management for that equipment and these different systems, it helps you to know what spare parts you need. These are all really important information, especially for the people that are managing the risk for this, but also the people on the business continuity side. So depending on the size of the facility and how many assets you have, your database could be very, very large. And so just making sure that it's accurate and updated on a reoccurring basis becomes a process all in itself. So some simple questions, are cameras, alarms, and sensors being inspected on a regular schedule? Are drills conducted to test your systems? And is there a documented maintenance log for all devices that you can access whenever you need it? So all of these systems need to be monitored and reviewed and be able to adapt when you need them, because physical security resilience isn't a project, just like any of the other parts of what we're talking about that have to do with risk, but it's a continuous process. So you should conduct regular reviews of your threats and your vulnerabilities and your evolving or emerging risks. You should be looking at threat intelligence and how to stay updated on those emerging risks, like are there new types of break-ins happening, or are there new cybersecurity threats? And when you do have an incident, making sure that you're analyzing what's happened and updated any of your procedures that need to be. To do all of these things, people need to know what to do, because humans are usually often either our weakest or our strongest link in that security resilience. I was talking to a friend of mine that was bemoaning that she was going through her cybersecurity training, and she goes, "This is the exact same training from 5 years ago." She's like, "I know that we've implemented new things, and why is the training the exact same training?" And so here is where we need to make sure that we're not actually weakening our people because you're not giving them the training that they need to keep up with the changes that are in your organization. Because staff need to know how to use even that access protocols. They need to know how to use them properly. We all know not to share our access cards or passwords, but we know that does happen. Also having incident response plans, having clear procedures for responding to any sort of breaches or alarms or emergencies, and having regular security awareness. Refresher training is important. So people not only need to know how to use the systems properly, but how do you expect people to report on suspicious behavior, and back to the old evacuation days. I'm sure each of you has been in a high rise where you're supposed to evacuate the building and you see, top management sitting in their offices not evacuating with everybody else. It is really important that everybody is aware of all of the safety protocols. So because of that, every organization needs a workplace safety program. What they're saying is that training can reduce the risk of workplace injury by up to 60%. So when people understand what they're supposed to be doing, it really helps. And that should be done, right when somebody's onboarded, along with periodic refreshers, depending on how their job changes and where they're going in the building. There should be consistent and regular, your work site should be analyzed for safety risks. It should be a regular process to make sure everything's up to date and that you're keeping track of trends, like are the same kinds of accidents happening? Is it with the same equipment or in a certain area or involving the same people? If it's involving the same people, that's a little problematic. And do you have the proper tools, the PPE equipment? Who's at the most risk, for an accident? One of the consulting jobs that I had was for a pharmaceutical, and the storing of the medications that were given for cancer and the chemo, and the equipment that had to be used to store that, and all the personal protective equipment that anyone coming into that part of the facility needed to have. So, we often think about buildings that have, dangerous chemicals and that sort of thing, but sometimes there are a lot of times it's chemical based, but for different reasons too. We should also be looking at occupant safety and health. So air quality problems inside. Are you seeing occupational illnesses or injuries? Are people being exposed to hazardous materials, or, what's the risk of accidental falls? And so, anybody who's responsible for the design and maintenance of buildings need to make sure that your occupants are not just safe, but that they're also, are not at risk for any health issues. And of course, you should have an emergency response plan, whatever you call it, as well as a business continuity plan to ensure the continuity of all the business activities within that facility. And this is, like I mentioned earlier, this is where business continuity was born, was in facility management. In fact, that's when people used to ask the question of, well, who should own business continuity? Where should it be? And for years and years and years, it was part of the facilities. And then it would move into IT, and then it was like facilities and IT. And so we're saying, yes, it needs to be part of everything. And so, we don't really care, quote, who owns it, but the fact is it all needs to be integrated and working together. So when you're specifically looking at your physical security, this isn't your entire facility management plan. This is the physical security strategy and plan. Your strategy should implement a set of security measures to restrict and grant access to certain areas within your premises. It should include using both technology and security personnel. You can't rely on either one totally. There should be a combination. Your strategy should include how to protect your assets from intruders, from internal threats, cyber attacks, any accidents or natural disasters. And it should be, like I said, a mix of technology and in-person monitoring as well, because technology can be hacked. And so sometimes people need to actually be thinking and evaluating what that is. The purpose of your plan is to protect your guests and your personnel, of course, to keep people out who do not belong in your building, to keep unauthorized personnel or guests from being able to access your sensitive areas within the building, to protect your confidential information, and to protect hazardous material you use by your business. So some of the content that should be in there would be controlling physical access to all of your systems. Where it could be as simple as your networked workstations, or keeping people away from areas containing flammable or explosive materials. Even shipping and receiving areas are sometimes the place that organizations are the most vulnerable, because the shipping dock remains open and people can get in and out there. It's a vulnerable place. But make sure that your physical security plan includes the building itself, the data network, all of your environmental controls, your security controls, and all of your telecommunications equipment that serves your environment. Also make sure that you're collaborating with external experts, so that you have, that you're partnering with others, and that you're working with local law enforcement and emergency services in order to coordinate response plans and facility layouts. I'm going to give you a very simple example. Years ago, a friend of mine is an artist, and he decided to kind of move from the art world into the design world and marketing and design, using his talents a little differently. And so he had put an office in a building that had apartments upstairs and quite a big business kind of on the street side, and his business was using part of that in the back. And he decorated up his office with all of his artwork. It was quite lovely, as well as, we had 6 or 8 computers and different systems that were doing different things. And so I was sitting there and I was saying, Rick, tell me, how are you protecting your stuff now that you're You know, you're out on your own and you've got your own space. And he kind of looked at me. He's like, what are you talking about? And I said, well, you've got a lot of equipment here and you've got a lot of artwork here. He goes, oh, I have insurance. And I said, yeah, you're gonna redo all of your artwork. And I said, and what are you going to do while you're waiting for the insurance to come in if something happens to your equipment? And this was really before cybersecurity became an issue. So we were actually talking about the actual equipment itself. Now, his office happened to be just off of Main Street in a community, and the fire department was within a block away. The police department was within a mile, and a local hospital was with maybe 6 blocks away. So he was in a very good location. So I suggested to him, and by the way, he was in like an antique, I don't want to say an antique building, but a historical building. So the windows and the doors were just gorgeous. And so he met up with the fire department, and they just put a key in and drilled a box into the side of his building so that if the fire department needed to get in for any reason, they wouldn't knock down his doors or break his windows. They also told him, just get a roll of visqueen and have different rolls around the 4 corners of your office so that in case you have any water coming in or something like that, you can cover up your equipment. And you can and they also asked him what was his most important artwork. And so wouldn't you know, 6 weeks later, this is crazy. This is one of my, like, I don't know, feel like a storyteller here, but it actually happened. It was the Christmas holidays, and one of the apartments above his building, above his office, caught fire from a Christmas tree. And the fire department came, and and he was out of town because it was the holidays, so he was not there. And the fire department came into his building using that key, covered up all of his stuff with the visqueen, and took his most valuable pieces of artwork and put it in the part of the room that wasn't being as damaged by all the water that they were pouring on the fire upstairs. He ended up being able, and then they called him. He came home from his family event and was able to move all of his things into his home, while his building, it took 3 months before he was able to get back into his office and it was repaired. And I got a nice dinner out of that one, but that's just really basic things. And so the more complex your facility is, the more you need to depend on local law enforcement and emergency services. Obviously, you're going to need insurance and compliance to make sure that you're meeting all of those things, but insurance is insurance. And if you live in a state like Florida, where insurance is hard to come by these days, and in fact, one of my cousins has been still waiting. This will be 3 years in January to get back into their timeshare that was pretty much very much damaged, but the insurance has not been coming. Not just the insurance, but the FEMA money has been stopped. And so they actually, in order to keep their building and get back into what they've had for 30 years, they've had to invest money to get the building back open. All of the owners had to do that because the money hasn't come from the government and the insurance like they had expected it to. And like I said, it'll be 3 years in January. So you can't depend on those to meet all of your needs. And then, like I said, with just doing the kind of the thing I did, as a volunteer, to do a security audit based on identifying any blind spots or to ensure best practices, just to have somebody come out and look who's got a different perspective, who might see things that you might not see. So things to consider: do your systems comply with your fire, building, and safety codes? Is video surveillance retention policy compliant with regulations? Has coordination been established with that local law enforcement? Just some really basic questions to consider, because you need to treat your security as a living ecosystem. You need to make sure that you're combining your strong physical infrastructure, your advanced technology, your redundancy, your maintenance, your training, and all of that for continuous improvement, because each of these layers should complement the others so that if one fails, the others still protect the organization. Just to kind of finish up, you need to have a comprehensive approach. And some of these things are going to be a little bit duplicative, but looking at it from a different perspective. So when we look at stakeholders, every group involved or connected to your facility is going to view risk differently. So incorporating their input helps make that system a lot stronger. So your executives and leadership are going to be concerned more with liability and continuity of operations and protecting the assets. They need clear reporting on the vulnerabilities and ROI for those security investments. The employees and occupants are going to focus more on personal safety and ease of use. And if the systems seem overly complex or inconvenient, they might lead to risky behaviors. Your visitors and your clients, people coming in, they require clear access protocols that balance security with the welcoming environment. Your security and facility staff need to make sure that training and procedures, that they are trained and they know their procedures on how to respond to incidents, to maintain their systems and report any issues that they see promptly. And then your emergency services and insurers, they're going to have certain standards that require you to be met in order to get quick response as well as lower premiums. But we need to look at external environmental conditions. These security systems don't operate. We can't just be looking internally. You also have to be looking externally. And so your location matters. So what's the geography where you are? What's your crime rate? What kinds of weather and natural hazards are you vulnerable to? What's your political and social climate? A very close friend of mine, her family ran a furrier for 75 years, and every holiday season in the winter here up, in the north part of the country here in the U.S., PETA would demonstrate and really disrupt their business. And so knowing, what kinds of social climates are there against your company, specifically for what you do, is also important. But like I mentioned with the, the fire that wasn't a fire but ended up being a water damage in that adjacent properties. I also did a risk assessment for a bank where we were asked to do a facility risk assessment for all of their data centers. I think there were 12 or 14 of them around the US. And after the first 3, we went back and we said, is it intentional that all of your data centers are in a flood zone and next to nuclear plants or manufacturing facilities with hazardous materials? I was like, somebody, these buildings have been there for a really long time, but sometimes even being in the same community as a data center can be impacting your external environment as well when you talk about water and power and those sorts of things. Making sure that your systems are installed, configured, and used correctly. This directly impacts their effectiveness. So making sure they're properly configured, that people know how to use them, that you've got those redundancies and failovers like we've talked about. Making sure that you've got secure locations for those things that you want to have secure. Sometimes how equipment is stored is overlooked. Making sure that they're in climate controlled areas, that you've got them in places that are tamper resistant, that you've got, and that you know what your inventory is. Again, using some of those tools to track your spare parts, manage credentials and any portable devices. And of course, making sure that you're meeting all legal requirements, all industry standards, and insurance and contractual obligations are part of that as well. And of course, don't forget about keeping up those credentials for your access control. So having those role-based permissions, kind of your credential life cycle. So when people leave or their roles change, that their credentials change, and making sure you've got audit trails as to who's accessed what, when, and why, in order to detect misuse or insider threats. And of course, all of this should be done using the risk management cycle of identifying, assessing, mitigating, monitoring, and reviewing, all as part of your reporting and your managing risk to your facility. This chart is just a kind of a summary of some goals and metrics you might have based on those original goals that we talked about of ensuring operational efficiency. So making sure that you're maintaining your building systems and processes to reduce downtime and support daily operations. And your KPI might be that your system downtime is tied to however many hours a month, or looking at work order response time. So your target might be less than 2 hours of downtime per month, or that 95% of your work orders are responded to within 24 hours. When you're looking at maintaining facility security as a goal, here you're trying to make sure that you're ensuring compliance with health, fire, and workplace safety standards to protect your occupants. So here your KPIs might be around the number of safety incidents or the number of people trained. So your target might be 0 major incidents in a year and 100% of your staff trained annually. If you're optimizing your asset management, making sure that you can extend the life cycle of your equipment and reduce costs through using that preventive maintenance. So having that KPI being preventive versus reactive, and that ratio of, what is your average equipment life cycle? So here the target might be 70% is preventive maintenance, and that your life cycle meets or exceeds your specs for that equipment. That the fourth goal is controlling your operational costs. So managing your operating expenses and utilities by at the same time maintaining service quality. So looking at your operational costs per square foot, your energy consumption per square foot, and your target might be to have year-over-year cost reductions, 5% energy use reduction annually, something like that. And then looking at to enhance occupant experience, to provide a comfortable and functional environment that supports productivity. So things like your occupant satisfaction scores or the number of comfort-related complaints. So a target might be that you're looking for, greater than or equal to 85% satisfaction and less than 5 complaints per quarter. So to summarize, that last one was kind of our summary. Are there any questions? We have about 2 minutes for questions. I did see one question come in saying CMMS includes a contact list for equipment warranties and service contract summary for emergency repair coverage, as well as names and contact. Thank you for sharing that. Very much appreciated. Yeah, the CMMSs can do so much to just help you stay on top of everything. Any other questions or comments? If not, just reminding you that you can, here's a question that came in. I will take a look at that. As far as sharing the slides, you can view these slides, and pause them when you're viewing these on the our YouTube channel or on our website. You can certainly, copy any slide that you like. We just don't have them downloadable. So you're welcome to take a screen print or something like that. We do certify people as leaders in resilience, and looking at all of these ways to manage risk from more of a top management or senior management level in your organization. Like I said, our next webinar will be on November 19th, considering the impact of geopolitical risk on our operations. And a year ago is when we decided to talk about that, and that has totally changed in the last year. So I'm a little bit nervous about that, but I will do the best I can to figure out how to talk about geopolitical risk without talking politics. That'll be my challenge. Thank you very much for attending today, and we hope you sign up for next month. Thank you. Bye.